with geopolitical news now. Zero Hedge reports naval update, T-minus 1 week until Arabian Sea destination reached. The news surrounding the Middle East, particularly Iran and Syria, may come and go in waves, but for the most part it is loud, political, grandstanding, jawboning and largely noise. Or rather, it will be noise until these two catalytic events occur. The third US aircraft carrier, CVN-74 Stennis, and the second big deck amphibious warship, LHA Peleliu, both dispatched as of several weeks ago with the destination for the 5th US fleet headquartered in Bahrain, reached their target. This is in 1 week's time from today. The Arabian Sea, located by the Straits of Hormuz and next to Iran. As the following naval update from Stratfor shows, which you can see on the screen, both are now within a week of reaching their destination, conveniently so with at least 2 weeks to go until the presidential election. So basically, it's widely accepted that the United States only launches a new war when there are three aircraft carriers in place in whatever region in which they wish to engage in that conflict. So in 1 week's time, that's precisely the situation we're going to have around the Arabian Sea there, right next to Iran. So given Turkey's declaration of war on Syria and their demand for a no-fly zone, which we just talked about, we really have to be on the lookout for this. Because obviously it looks as if Iran has been delayed until spring 2013, but that doesn't mean there couldn't be an incident in the region over the next few weeks. Something, you know, in the context of what the neocon think tanker and lobbyist, which we featured last week, Patrick Clawson, wished out loud for, a false flag provocation involving Iran. And remember that an incident involving Iran is precisely what ABC News predicted last week could be the October surprise that hands either Obama or Romney the presidency. Now, of course, you know, there's not a cigarette's paper difference between the two of them when it comes to backing up the US military-industrial complex. But that's not to say there aren't different groups of power within that two-party system jockeying for position and power. And the ABC News piece was pretty certain that there'd be an October surprise involving Iran or a false flag on US interests before the election. So 1 week from now, there's going to be 3 US aircraft carriers stationed right outside Iran with just 3 weeks to go until the US presidential election. So it seems pretty clear that if anything's going to happen, it's going to happen in that time slot. And in a similar vein, just a different position on the globe, moving on now to this Business Insider story. 2 carrier groups are now operating in the China Sea. The USS George Washington and the USS John C. Stennis aircraft carrier strike groups, a flotilla of 5 ships and more than 10,000 Navy personnel, are now operating in the conflict-ridden South China Sea. The news was announced by the Navy a few days ago, but it is now making the rounds in Asian media outlets and generating as much speculation as it is concern. So, 3 ships around Iran, 2 aircraft carriers now in the South China Sea. So this is basically a warning to China not to escalate its posturing in the island dispute. If you saw a 3rd aircraft carrier, as we just discussed, then the alarm bells would really start ringing. But it's about reassuring Japan, of course, that the US will follow through on its treaty obligations while also serving as a hands-off message to China. Because we covered, of course, a couple of weeks ago, a lot of the protests in China against Japan's claim of ownership over these disputed islands were created by the Chinese government itself. That's the only reason the protests were allowed to happen. Legitimate, genuine demonstrations in China are routinely crushed by the authorities. We just saw last week the villagers complaining about being kicked off their land. They steamrolled over one guy, crushed him to death. So if it's a genuine protest in China, it's certainly not going to be even reported on by the state media, never mind encouraged by the state itself, which is exactly what we saw with these anti-Japanese protests just a couple of weeks ago. So it's America's response to China's saber-rattling, basically. That's why there are 2 large aircraft carriers now operating in the South China Sea. Remember the story a couple of weeks back about how China was preparing to respond to the US becoming involved in the conflict. That's actually what a top PLA admiral said. They were getting ready for America to embroil itself in the conflict. So it looks like this one's going to bubble under the surface, at least for the time being, while the focus remains on the Middle East, but the tension remains high.
Ask yourselves, what are you doing in this time of great challenge? What are you doing to unlock minds?